Hello, everybody, and welcome to our world today, the Unionist perspective. Today, we're looking at topics that we believe are indicative of a theme of reflecting on our past as well as our future. And so some of the things that have come up are quite interesting to ponder in terms of where we've come from and where we're going to. So yeah, I'm going to open it up to the team for today, and let's see what you guys believe stood out for you most.
I guess what stood out for me the most was so there's a TikTok that Yureen shared about this American guy who was over in Japan and had a conversation with this old 72-year-old Japanese man, and they were like reflecting about the different issues and strengths of their respective countries. I watched that again, but I felt it was very cool and resonant, and maybe it kind of cuts across multiple themes we're talking about. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. Do you guys want to go ahead with that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I thought it was pretty cool. This guy definitely had a spiritual healing experience in this park over in Japan. And so for people who didn't watch it, it was basically, I'm going to share it in the comments again later, but it was basically an American guy traveling in Japan, and he was basically reflecting on life, and he felt this call to just sit on a small park bench where mostly locals were. There were no like tourists really in this area. Then 70-year-old Japanese man just sat with him, and they started talking. It was pretty a big fit for the Japanese man because he had been taking English lessons. And so I guess that's what sparked up the discussion, because it was basically interested in seeing an American point of view on what's happening in the world and in their country, and what were the strengths from America. It was like, well, America is like a big power, political, economical, military power. Why do you think there is such a greatness in it? And the guy responded that basically he didn't know. There's probably a lot of good in like the way a society and economy is arranged in the United States. And then the guy proceeded to ask him, like, what do you think could be better? And basically he was saying that the same thing that brought America to greatness was also the thing that was dividing it right now. Basically that people were a little bit too individualistic, and you had to be really loud, like 1000% self to kind of be recognized and have success there. And the guy was like, okay, not convinced, but okay. And he asked, like, what did you think of Japan? And the guy said that there was a lot of solidarity there. So basically he was pointing out to the community feeling and solidarity feeling that basically, I guess, he was missing in New York. And the guy didn't really agree. Like, he agreed, and then he talked about like his country and its successes, but also like things that need to be improved. And they started talking about their feeling, and he said that he was kind of feeling sad because there are a lot of things that were there for decades that needed to be arranged, and it would be upon the shoulders of the new generations to do that. And that's when the guy started to think like, oh my God, like wherever you are in the world, like we're all going through the same things, like our countries are good at some things and healing some of the things. And we just all need to go through life and feel the sadness until it passes and basically kind of heal. Basically, that's what we're really talking about without like saying the word all the time. And the guy said, like, for example, the Japanese are really like they're quiet but they're really like very inside because they don't have to go out as Americans do. But that's something that also is prompt to them like basically staying with their own peers instead of going out in the world. And that's why the Japanese man was really proud of being able to speak English, because like a lot of people didn't go out to meet other people other than locals. And there was this kind of like very closed down energy to the country. And I thought it was very on point, because the thing that he was missing connection in that way, like missing connection in like the closed down feeling of Japan. And the American man was missing connection in like the individualistic society that is it was brought up in, and feeling like they needed a new sense of community. And so basically each were experiencing like their own brand of healing around connection, but that manifested in like very different ways, depending on the consciousness of each of our country, which I thought was pretty interesting. I think it's pretty important, like it's really about like reflection on the past and future, and also the present of each of our country and politics. And that's really on brand, I would say, for what we're going to talk about today. Because it kind of gives us an illustration of like the choices that each country has made, the choices that consciousness is making, and the choices that also need to be made in the future to kind of go to truth and peace and arrive at each country's own, development, and I guess heaven and happiness and joy. And that's all, basically everyone is pursuing this. But the way that we're pursuing, our peace is like very important. And sometimes you're making the wrong choices, thinking that you'll get to peace and to prosperity and abundance. And sometimes you're making the right choices, and it's all about that. It's all about choices and spiritual lessons, spiritual path. That's all that we're ever about on earth. And I thought this discussion was pretty important. It's very funny how the concluding message of that TikTok is basically what can introduce our discussion today. So I don't know if you guys have like feelings on that, like things to say, maybe want to make links to the other stories that we're going to talk about today. But yeah, I'm all ears.
Yeah, what stood out to me was that how much you can learn from another perspective and from another person. And that also goes along with our theme and topic about the G7 summit and how they're learning with each other, as well as adding more people into the summit to either gain more financial support or get more perspective, and to see why the G7 isn't the top as it used to be in financial dependence. Yeah, that conversation really stood out. And like you said, he was very grounded in his spirituality to even be open to that discussion and to understand it in the depths that he did. So yeah, it was a very nice outline of what we're going to talk about.
You bring up a good point, and the fact that G7 is at Hiroshima as well. The fact that this discussion took place in Japan is not like lost on me. Yeah, I think it's very important, and I also felt like the guy, when he felt his sadness about like the things that hadn't changed, I really felt that it was talking about the things that hadn't changed in like 70 years. So basically since the end of the war, and that Japanese were still making their way through. And so the fact that it's the summit is also at Hiroshima is also very symbolic for this, just for this, you know. I don't think it's a coincidence. Yeah. How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, I'm also saddened that things haven't changed much for their country as well as a whole for financial advancement. I mean, for some reason, I was happy that like the G summit wasn't the top 0.5%. Now it's like the top 30. And I'm like, good, there should be more of a disbursement. There should be more of a middle ground and more middle class within our countries. So I do see some changes in that, even though it might look like they're losing their financial gain, but I feel that there's just like there needs to be more change and more of a perspective on more countries so that yeah, there can be more evolution and expansion.
So the thing I found quite interesting about it was this perspective of previous generations leaving things behind. And what stands out to me is that there's often more focus on the negative that has been left behind than the positive that has been left behind. And the reason why it's standing out is because I also just, I was sort of reading something and I saw this meme that said, don't just be upset with your ancestors for leaving behind generational trauma. What about the generational gifts and the generational blessings? And we need to focus on, in that sense of what's been the past and the progression across various things from an economic point of view, from a social point of view. There has been a progression. So it was interesting for these two very different generations to connect with each other and remember that they have a connection. Remember that there are still things that they have in common, good or bad. There's still something there. There's still the connection, the sense that, okay, so the West looks like this and potentially the East looks like that, but the underlying thing is that people are still searching for unification. They're still searching for unity. They're still looking to connect at a deeper level. And so, yeah, it was, it's just kind of interesting to see the almost generational sense of connection playing out through somebody that's probably almost in the decline of his life versus somebody that seems to be in the prime of his life, and how they're still connecting through the lessons that they're all learning, which is literally what we do on a daily basis if we chose to pay attention. There's a lot of things that we collectively need to, as you said, heal through, but also learn through. And I think it's something that it literally goes back to our topic a few weeks ago about learning from the lessons that present themselves so that they don't continue to repeat themselves in an unhealthy way.
Yeah, I love what you said, Granville, about that, like how we also need to appreciate the positive things left behind from past generations. And but I feel like it was really it was interesting to hear that guy's perspective, the older Japanese man, because he was saying, oh, things haven't changed in our country, but I feel like in America people often think of Japan as being more reverent of the ancestors and of past generations, and also of the older generation. Like Japan is known for that, at least here. And I feel like a lot of what Japan has that is really, really valued by the rest of the world and that contributes is based in its like ancient culture, ancient cultural heritage, its sense of community and tradition and everything like that. And so I thought that was interesting. And I feel like, yeah, that was kind of the point of what that the guy who made the TikTok was saying, is that like we're all going through the same thing. Essentially, fundamentally, we're all one and going through the same thing. So we don't need to think that our problems are special or that that makes us special or that we're alone or isolated. Like we are all going through the same things, but it looks different. And like different countries are at different places with different things, you know, but overall, like we're all on the same journey. That was really refreshing to me. And yeah, but I do feel like both countries can learn much from each other, because the US kind of has more of a tendency to like just be very forward looking and just be about like, okay, you guys, what are you going to do next? What new is going to come from you? Versus instead of like reflecting on the past, being aware of it, addressing it, you know, all of that, and just kind of also even appreciating heritage, because a lot of people who come to America sometimes feel like they need to like hide their heritage to fit in with the American melting pot, which it's actually more of a salad, you know, with everything mixed together. The American salad is way more interesting, I would say, than it is partly a melting pot, because something new comes from all the parts coming together, creates something new. It's not just a salad. Like a cranberry doesn't become a piece of lettuce, right? In a salad, it stays a cranberry. But but I just feel like there's a lot to learn from both any two countries together can learn something. That's what
Definitely. I feel like he was also saying like, I don't know if the guy really understood it, but the Japanese man was also very much underlining that we needed to look at what was good there and also be very neutral. Like, I feel like these days, like people are always saying there are a lot of problems about America. I think that there's another song that got out today that is like, I don't know if it got out today, but it's basically like this Kendrick Lamar and Beyonce song highlighting that America is having a problem or not good. And yes, there are problems, but this like peaceful conversation on a park bench was basically about like, hey, you guys, you didn't arrive to this greatness by doing all bad things. It's not possible. Way consciousness is made is not like America has not cheated its way to the top, basically. And Japanese too, like they got out of poverty, have a booming economy, are part of the G7, are part of people that are making all the international decisions. That's not something where you arrive at it through like all just Spain. Like there are good things in it. And obviously the system is not perfect. And yes, we are highlighting a lot of problems because they need healing. And basically we're focusing on what feels like bad, especially if like people are reveling in like the bad choices that they make. But it doesn't mean that we're not respecting the culture and the positive things that each country brings. And I think we need a lot of that today, because like if we're all about like, oh, our society is going haywire and it's always bad and we got a problem, we're focusing on the upsets, and that's not what life is about. Like it's really not what it is about. And I just want to highlight that he was also saying, hey, in his consciousness, basically, subconsciously, they were saying like, let's put down our pride. Let's put down any feeling of like, my country's the best, or my country is just like down in hell and there's no saving it. And let's look at this like, emotionally with our feelings, but also very rationally, very logically, and say like, hey, like there are things to improve, but there is good there, and we're all moving through our own like progress, and progress doesn't mean that there aren't things that are already perfect at the moment, So yeah, I just wanted to say that because I think basically what I feel from consciousness, and the reason why this was very healing, is that people have a tendency of saying like, oh, it's always going bad. It's always like focusing on the bad. Politics is always focusing on the bad and like making people almost like want to fear in order to vote for them, like always putting fear above to kind of rally people together. And this discussion was just like, we can rally through peace. And that felt so good, like so good and so refreshing. I think that's why it was so healing. And the guy was so emotionally vulnerable afterwards, even though they didn't say much, but like in their communication, there was a lot of meaning,
Yeah, I was even and it made me think about for myself too, like because Russia is a big topic in the news, and Russia is a country that we all want to have like strong boundaries with right now, like very strong boundaries with Russia, because of how they're choosing, the collective of Russia is choosing a lot of aggression and dishonesty and abuse and stuff like that very stubbornly. But I've been thinking about that recently a lot, and I spent, I studied abroad in Russia for like just a few months, but enough to really like get a sense of what it was like there and what like the spirit of the country was like. And I was like, yeah, no, it's like it is a cool country. It has something valuable to offer. Its culture actually has many gems. It's just the way actually in a sermon once, Jeff said this about Russia specifically. He was like, they have something great to share with the world, like every country, but they're basically not sure how to share it. And I think at first that might seem like a whitewashing of Russia's many like the stuff that they've done that's been really abusive. But I feel like what he was saying was that is the truth of it. And when we look at our own individual journeys, like we could look back at ourselves and be like, oh my God, like, right, I've done all of these like really crazy things, but the truth of it was that you were just learning, and that is the fundamental truth of it, and that you believe something that wasn't true and like didn't serve you, and you're learning to let that go. However, obviously that doesn't mean that we want to like drop all of our boundaries either with a country like Russia. You know what I mean? Because like me, like investing in like learning the language and having been there and studied everything about it, like I'm like, yeah, like I can't just say like, oh, this country is pure evil, to the core. Like I couldn't, and I felt like that's related to what we were talking about. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and I think another thing, and one of our topic actually for tonight is like taking the example of China. We consume Chinese culture through like martial arts, history, movies, food, cuisine. But it doesn't mean that we don't need to have strong boundaries with China as of today because of the system that they've put up in place, and that will probably get the world will experience a pretty big hit from any crisis that China is going to experience onward for the next few years and decades. And that doesn't mean that we're stopping we're still consuming Chinese food. That's part of the culture. I mean, yeah, that's something that we don't think about, but we really are consuming and respecting, in a sense, Chinese culture in these little like small ways. But that doesn't mean, because we have respect for what is good for the culture, that we don't need to put barriers there. And I mean, like, Russia also is very, like, obviously we're not showing it right now, but it's very culturally diverse. Obviously, it stretches from Europe to the Middle East to the limits of Asia. There are a lot of cultures in there, and they're not being put like forward in the limelight as of today, but it doesn't mean that they are not very interesting. They're really, like, it's amazing to learn about like Russian culture. I know a lot of people who learn about Russian culture, but that doesn't mean that they support like what is happening at the moment. So yeah, there is no need for, I guess we're learning maybe through this conversation that there's no need for polarization. Like, you can appreciate something that is good without being fully on board with like, hey, this is the best country ever, or this is the best politics ever, and we need to follow it to the end. Like, appreciate what is good and put a boundary on what is bad. And that's as simple as that. And maybe that's what we're learning right now. And maybe that's what the world is learning as well. So yeah, what do you feel about China? And no, Granville wants to say something before.
Yeah, so I think there's a, for me, there's a point at which we probably lose sight of how much we actually assimilate from other cultures. And it comes through because of the fact that we are so globally connected. It's so easy to hear the stories. It's so easy to see the news. It's so easy to interact with people so much faster. So in that assimilation and that ease of assimilation, there's also an ease of influence. And that ease of influence does require vigilance. It requires us to be much more clear about what we choose to consume, whether it's the language, their practices, the way they prepare food, to the deities that they serve. All of those things have an influence. All of those things vibrationally impact the overall consciousness. And when we speak to the boundaries, it is important for our boundaries to be clear about what we will allow to influence our vibration and what we won't. And so, it kind of becomes a situation of more hypervigilance than what we have ever experienced in our lives. And one of the things that kind of stands out is in the conversation around China's influence on the world. There's literally very, very few, if any, countries around the world that China hasn't influenced. There's very few countries around the world that Russia hasn't influenced. Like we know, for instance, that Russian athletes have tended to be superior in certain sports. There's no country in this world that doesn't know that. There's no country in the world that doesn't respect that. But in that respect, there's also a point at which we need to say, this is the line that we as a global citizen will accept. And transgressing the line is not acceptable. And I think that is why the Russia-Ukraine conflict has been such a global focus. And that's why there's a lot of conversation around from the G7 around potential sanctions to for lack of a better phrasing, to debilitate or stop feeding the Russian war machine. So, the fact of the matter is, as much as we believe that we are living in this global space, it's actually much smaller than what we believe it is, for the reason that the influence is so much faster. And the influence is felt so much faster. So economically, we all were impacted during COVID by supply shortages and those kind of things of major of chips around equipment, around cars, around laptops, those kind of things. So we need to remember that in this massive global sphere that we believe we're sitting in, it's actually much more contracted than it would have been before, because we reach each other so much faster.
I have to agree. If we see all the countries as just very complex human beings having an experience on Earth, and see their relationship with each other as we would see relationships with any of our peers in reality, there are just 200 countries. That's not a lot. You probably know the 201st person in your circle of reality very, very closely. Sorry. Even if they're family, work colleagues, you know them closely. You don't have the same relationship with any one of them, but you know them closely. And in these, for example, your family, probably you're in contact with them, but you had to put boundaries where it didn't feel like the relationship was necessary to be heading that way anymore. If you had family trauma, for example, or if you have friends and you think that there's a codependency there, or if you had romantic partners, there's probably a need to put a boundary there. Some you're not in relationship with anymore, some you have a relationship with, but not in all the spaces. And so if we see it that way, it's not difficult to see that actually, we're all neighbors, we're in close proximity with every country on Earth, and that's why we're having the same experience. But also it's very important to see that everything that we choose to support energetically or not from these countries will have an impact on us. And it's very important to see, because right now what I was talking with China is that they chose to play the game of greed to have money faster. And because that money and economy is built on very weak foundations in some places, it has a risk to crumble very fast too. Problem is, because everyone saw the short-term advantages of this economy, even if it was greedy, we all kind of played a part in supporting it, by having loans with it, having economies displaced in it, data, companies, support system, infrastructures, first materials, I don't know how it's called in English, but basically very raw materials production for a while. And we'll all have more or less ties with Chinese economy. And so because we weren't able to recognize the huge energetic that it was, or maybe we chose to ignore it, we're going to suffer from the greed that this relationship has, and it's part of our karma, there is a strong need to take responsibilities there. The same way you are taking responsibilities with putting a boundary on your own energy so that another relationship cannot take from you. That's your responsibility. You can't blame your own involvement on someone else. And so I guess like we'll have to see how this plays out. But like I think the more people are aware, like this discussion on the Japanese bench, that we are having the same experience and our feelings and our relationships are very, very important, and we need to treat it with care, not emotional pride or like polarization, but with neutrality, with thinking about it, with like seeing all of our relationship for what they are. Like we will learn how to have a healthy relationship with everyone, whether they make the choice of peace or not. But right now we're not at this place because everyone has had an agenda of like polarization or like very quick gains and maybe hype. And that's not the long game that Earth is actually about and the spiritual experience is actually about. So that is going to be a very big lesson for all of us. And that's just how it is. So yeah.
Yeah, I like the points that you guys are all bringing, and especially the fact that we're becoming so integrated because of our across country cultures and acceptance of other cultures. Probably why it's so important to use refinement and discernment at this point. Because, like you said, there's things that are coming up for us to heal in our neighboring countries as well as within us, so that we can become even more of a unity. And I see that unity. I also wanted to reflect on the US mortgage being very similar to Chinese's balloon inflation and balloon loans that they're giving. It's almost like they're giving these empty promises only to fill their own pockets. And then if either parties like don't keep up with these promises, there's going to be a crash. So the way I see it in the US is that you're giving these mortgages out, but if the person that is paying for these mortgages can't keep up with it, not only do you have to pay to then sell the house again, and it's becoming destructive for the economy in the US, but also that person is losing that house and it's weighing down on their community and their household and spreading out in poverty in their neighborhood too. So it's a two-way street. It's not like you will win by giving out these empty-handed promises. And you also won't win by not using discernment and refinement when taking these loans and these debts. So yeah, I'm learning a lot from just these interactions and seeing it both in the global scale and within us in the US.
Yeah, I feel that, we were talking about how with China, like the big thing that was causing this really unstable economy and this dishonesty about like the actual value of the economy, particularly real estate, was because, China as a collective like has and I guess is moving through this fear of being poor, and China like wanted to quickly rise out of the post-World War II devastation. Like they had like a huge civil war and the Japanese invaded them, right? So that was a huge blow to them. And on top of that too, they had Western countries were like, messing with them too. Even before that, the empire fell. Like there's just a whole lot of feelings to be felt there, and just moving through the feeling of like, oh my God, I can't accept all of this that happened. Like not being ashamed of where you're really at and loving yourself there makes you go faster. But it can seem like a fast gain if you just like deny that and you try to like do a get rich quick scheme, but then you get all of these negative like consequences. And I feel like that's the same thing that happens with the US too, like particularly the housing market. And like it's kind of similar in the US too. Like I feel people people were feeling in China and in the US, like, well, the real estate market is the best way for me to like build wealth like faster, and it's like very reliable. Everyone wants housing. I think just in China, it's kind of almost like, I guess you could say like maybe a more extreme version, because you have like those huge ghost cities that people were like thinking, oh my God, like this is going to be worth so much, but then like nobody even wants to move there, you know,
can afford it.
or can afford to live there. Yeah. Like, so I guess they were betting on demand that wasn't even there, you know, because they're like saying, oh my God, like we're gonna grow in wealth so much. And it's just like, you might be like overselling what's going on here. And that's kind of crazy. And I guess then it happens in the US too. I had no idea though, because before Jeff shared that thing with us about the housing market, like way too much building and like the values dropping and all that. I wasn't even aware of that. Like the media, I feel like I haven't heard anything about it.
I
And I'm
think
like,
if they did put out the strategy, I think people would have said way earlier, well, like they would have opposed the government in some kind of ways, I feel. Like they would have said, like, you guys, is this sounding? And obviously, like, the intention, I don't know what it is exactly. I can't say that the intention is purely good, even though it was to, like, be able to sell to people, even with a crisis, you know. But the thing is, like, did you really think by doing the same thing than in 2006, 7, and 8, you would have different results? And that's why I was saying earlier, I think people are still not understanding that this is a spiritual experience. Like you won't have the same results if you do the same thing. And so that's why we're at this discussion on reflection on the past. And we're always like, holy crap, you guys never really get this. Did you know that happened like a century ago? Are you going to repeat the same thing? And that's why we're always in this cycle of like, well, you guys, like, something's gonna change. You're making the same choices. And I feel people would have said, like, this is very dumb, you guys. Stop using subprimes and this system of economy that literally put us into, yeah, I'm not going to use swear words right now, but I feel there are a lot of feelings about this. And basically also subprimes, they were there to kind of sell to people that were already poor. And I know it's difficult to kind of change banking standards quickly, but really it's been 15 years. Like it should have been suppressed from the banking system long ago. Why wasn't it? Like they had 15 years to do this, and they continued to rely on this. And this was built to make the poor people buy housing, but also it doesn't protect them from any of the repercussions of the system if there is anything that goes wrong. And so this is a very, 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 very bad plan for people individually that bought the housing. And this is a very, very, very good plan for, I guess, the banking system, but individually, because if 100, 1,000 people are having the same experience at the same time, this is bad for everyone. And so I'm like, again, short gains, but exactly what we were talking about earlier. Like, what are you guys doing? This is good for the banking system if this happens to one person. So in theory, this is good, but in reality, this is very, very bad. And again, but that bears a question, like, what are we doing with our choices? So yeah.
Which is it's a very interesting question for two reasons. One, people choose not to learn from other people's mistakes. There's this condition in humanity that says, I must make my own mistakes to learn. And mistakes in and of themselves are not a bad thing if you choose to learn the lesson. The other thing is projection. Oh, you made that mistake. You burned your fingers. I'm going to do this. I'm not going to burn my fingers the same way that you burnt your fingers. And what is the end result? Exactly the same burn. You know, so there's this projection of your mistake, your consequences. But you're doing exactly the same thing. You know, it's kind of that, it's kind of this, you know, this idiom in English that says you can't put lipstick on a pig, kind of thing. And literally some of these things are about putting lipstick on a pig. You know, it just does not work. It's like, it's literally, and it's gonna sound ridiculous, but it goes to the extent of, and now I am gonna be a little bit obnoxious. It's like putting a flower in an asshole and calling it a vase. It doesn't happen, you know. It just does not work. And I think that's the thing that we need to call in here, is call in the learning, call in the healing, call in the fact that you cannot win at somebody else's expense. And because literally in taking from people, you inadvertently and eventually completely take from yourself as well. That is the law of the universe. That is the law of cause and effect. And we've had these conversations around universal law as well. And the law of cause and effect is that you are not blameless when you are causing the demise of someone else, because it literally just comes back. It's like we understand that if something's happening in our reality, we are creating that reality. So globally, there's a lot of unusual realities being created, but I feel like the unusual realities being created are the thing that's highlighting to us the contrast that's no longer beneficial, and that we don't need to learn through that contrast repeatedly. And we kind of need to sometimes say the message just as clear as that, because sometimes people just don't understand it. You know, it's like drawing a line on a chalkboard with chalk is not going to sound the same as drawing a line on a chalkboard with a pair of scissors. But the pair of scissors is going to catch somebody's attention more. And sometimes you have to grab people's attention.
Isaiah is definitely picturing that scissors of a chalkboard.
And can you feel it? Because I'm feeling it.
I don't like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like we should compare it to ChatGPT and the evolutions that are there. I feel like a lot of people would say, well, this is not comparable because this is the geopolitics and or global politics and things like that. But I feel like they're making a good example of choices and learning from the past and future. I think from the very beginning, OpenAI, the company was very straightforward. We've built a tool, we've given you value, but we understand that it is not perfect. It was said like every time, like, and they're very clear on like their boundaries and also the boundaries of the technology. And because they're very clear on that, it's become part of their branding, and that's a strength right now. And so the evolutions that they are bringing feel very safe, feel very trustworthy. So they have a good standing in the market, I guess the economic system as of today. And they're just doing it right. They're not abusing anyone. They're not saying that AI is going to replace anything. They're just testing and learning and giving. And that's the evolution, and that's the future. And that's something that it feels like they're always thinking in like, all right, will this help an individual? And so in helping an individual, will this help everyone in humanity? And so they're thinking of like personal gains and global gains, and that works. And that's just, for now at least, that's God to me. That's what this is about. Like that's real value, like actual spiritual value, even if this is technology. And that's just a good, I guess that's just a good example of how to make choices. And so, yeah, I just wanted to reflect on that since that's the topic of today, reflecting. And yeah, just learning. They're actually learning because we're on a high competitive market. They need to be learning about their own mistakes in order to advance. And they've made the choice to do so. And that's just very different from what we're seeing about like short gains and repeating the same things, thinking it will bring like different results.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting point what you said about how the OpenAI innovations feel really safe because they're not, they're just, being straight up about what they're offering and learning about how it can be applied and testing. And it's not branded as something that's like, oh my God, this is going to replace like 35% of the workforce. Awesome revolution, although it could replace some of the workforce. Well, it could replace some of the labor that has to be done by people. I feel like in terms of like reflecting on the past, like that has happened so many times throughout history. I don't know a lot about it, but like the printing press replaced monks doing like handwritten copies of books, mainly the Bible. So now the Bible can be spread everywhere. And, if you want an illuminated manuscript of the Bible written by a monk, you have to pay like top dollar for it, and it's because you want it. Or that wasn't the best example, maybe, but it's a funny example. But just, I feel like that's the whole premise. Like everyone needs to just like let go of feeling attached to how things are currently in the economy, and humanity's like been going through this forever, and let it go and just be like, okay, like what's the next value that I can offer? What's my purpose? Maybe I don't need to be attached to doing this thing. Maybe ChatGPT can do this, and then I can do something that brings me more joy. Because like the TikTok or the video that we were watching, they called this chat bot or something, or this application of ChatGPT, they called it McKinsey GPT, and that's a consulting firm. And so the chat AI was doing what a consulting firm would be paid like $250,000 to do, like to create this plan for cybersecurity for all these like offices across Canada it was. And they're like, yeah, we can just do that with AI, and I feel like that is the nature of increasing abundance, is that now you're able to produce something like way more efficiently that used to require like a ton of resources and energy, and now it can be done easily, and I feel like that's a good thing. And people will naturally find the next way that they can give value to the economy, you know what I mean?
I
I'm
think it
sorry.
really depends. Oh, sorry. Go
Oh, I
ahead.
was saying, like, I just want to say that I'm just speaking to like that people have like been saying forever, like, oh my God, technology is going to replace people, and then people won't have any way to like make a living. And I'm just like, I feel like that's just the voice of ego, pretty much.
I guess it depends. That's the thing. I wouldn't say like it depends on what you're replacing it for, and what you're kind of being non-attached to. I feel like displacing the economy to China, obviously on the long term, this was bad. I think displacing to new technology can be good, and maybe instead of replacing the task force, it can transform it, as it has always happened, truly and really, because knowing how it works in like marketing and communications agency, and having brothers who work in like consultant firms, I know that one person is doing the job of like 6 persons in general. And so basically ChatGPT will basically, I guess, better the way that we're doing jobs for everyone. I think it won't replace, because the thing that people didn't want to hire for probably will be filled anyway, and like the people inside the firm would have better living and will feel healthier, not overworked and overstressed. So that could be something that happens too, which is not something that happened with like displacing all of the economy in China, even though it had its gains. So it's not always synonymous with replacing task force. And I feel that's what feels so good about this technology, is that it feels like it's always going to be partnering with task force, not completely replacing it. So yeah, we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what it feels like.
I agree. And I was thinking too about how, like, the US, for example, in many countries, by offshoring like manufacturing to China, they've kind of like, well, become very intertwined with a really unstable economy. And that's part of it. But I was also thinking of like the environmental impacts of it too, because instead of, because having lots of factories, it creates like air pollution if you're using fossil fuels. So they just moved all of that over to China, and China has like some really big air quality issues, right? It's kind of like you're trying to bypass the issue, which is fossil fuels like cause pollution, and you want to find a clean energy alternative that's sustainable. But by bypassing it, then you're just kind of like fueling that problem more, of like the pollution from fossil fuels. It's just getting displaced to China, And I just thought that was so interesting, and maybe now I was kind of imagining, I was like, what if manufacturing moves back to a lot of these countries like the US, but then we're like, let's do renewable energy so that we don't get air pollution from that. I was wondering.
Maybe that's what will be happening if the economy is like going through a big change. Like, we don't know. Yeah. Hoping it won't be like pushed to the last minute, to be able to like just like happen, and the government will have to get into more debt to reduce costs so that it happens quicker and we move past fossil energy economy. I feel like we will probably push it back to last minute, but hey, at least it's their lesson. It's through pain, but it's our lesson. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree that it is our lesson, but I think it's also it's because of the fact that we're so connected that the lesson is presenting itself so much more for one reason and one reason only, that we choose to learn. And I think that's really the primary thing about reflecting, is that you need to reflect so that you take the lesson from what has happened. But having said that, we have reached our hour. So if there aren't any further comments, I'd like to say thank you to everybody for the conversation and to everybody that's followed us. And to all of those who haven't yet, please also feel free to like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel. And we will see all of you next week. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.